The heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom clicked shut behind Alara, sealing away the glacial silence and the suffocating presence of Kaelin Thorne. For exactly 3 seconds, she stood in the plush, carpeted hallway, her back pressed against the cool wood of the door. She closed her eyes and drew in a slow, shuddering breath, forcing the adrenaline that was screaming through her veins to settle. Her heart was hammering a frantic, erratic rhythm against her ribs, and her hands, tucked safely inside the pockets of her trench coat, were trembling. But they were the only things trembling. Alara Vance did not cry. She had shed her last tear 2 years ago in a sterile HR office, watching Marcus pack his box of stolen accolades while she was escorted out by security. She had learned a brutal, invaluable lesson that day. Emotions were a liability in the corporate world. They were leverage for your enemies and a weakness for your allies. She opened her eyes. The hallway was empty, the ambient lighting casting long, sharp shadows. She smoothed the front of her blazer, lifted her chin, and began to walk. Her heels struck the marble floor with a steady, rhythmic cadence that echoed through the cavernous executive suite. Click, 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 the sound of a woman who was not defeated but recalibrating. She reached the private elevator bank and pressed the call button. As she waited, she pulled her tablet from her portfolio. The screen glowed with the complex, beautiful schematics of the Obsidian Tower, her tower. The project she had poured her soul, her sleepless nights, and her reclaimed professional dignity into. Kaelin Thorne thought he could discard her like a faulty blueprint. He thought a public humiliation and an insulting poverty-wage consulting offer would break her spirit and send her scurrying back to whatever hole she had crawled out of. He had severely underestimated who he was dealing with. The elevator arrived. Alara stepped inside, descending rapidly toward the ground floor lobby. As the doors opened, the receptionist looked up. The woman's polite, professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second, replaced by a fleeting expression of profound pity. Alara met her gaze squarely, offering a tight, perfectly composed smile. "Have a good day," she said, her voice smooth and utterly unruffled. "You too, Miss Vance," the receptionist replied, her tone laced with an unspoken, "I'm sorry." Alara pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the relentless Seattle downpour. The cold rain hit her face, a shocking, grounding contrast to the stifling, ozone-heavy air of the penthouse. She walked to the curb, her mind already shifting from emotional survival to tactical warfare. "Miss Vance, wait." Alara paused, turning slowly. Julian Croft was sprinting out of the building, holding a black umbrella that was already losing its battle against the wind. He was breathless, his tie askew, his face pale and slick with rain and panic. "Ms. Vance, please," Julian panted, stopping a few feet away from her. He didn't seem to care about the rain soaking the shoulders of his expensive suit. "Please, don't get in the car yet. We need to talk." Alara crossed her arms, her posture rigid. "There is nothing to talk about, Julian." Mr. Thorne made his position abundantly clear. "I'm blacklisted. My vision is a costly vanity project, and my only value to Ignis Holdings is as a remote data entry clerk." No, that's not what I meant," Julian stammered, wringing his hands. "Look, I know what he said in there. It was unprecedented and cruel." The board was stunned. Mr. Pendleton practically choked on his coffee. "Then they can hire Sterling and Croft from New York and enjoy the inevitable structural failures in year 3, Alara said coldly. "But that's just it." Julian stepped closer, lowering his voice despite the roaring rain. "Sterling and Croft are glorified drafters. They do cookie-cutter luxury high-rises. They don't understand geothermal integration on this scale. If they take over, they will botch the core. And when the thermal expansion cracks the foundation, or the seismic bracing fails under stress, do you know who the media and the investors will blame?" Ilara's eyes narrowed. The trap snapped shut in her mind, and she saw the ugly, familiar shape of it. "They'll blame the original lead architect," she whispered, the realization cold and sharp. "They'll say my foundational designs were flawed. They'll say I set the project up for failure." "Exactly," Julian said, his voice desperate. "Cale is so obsessed with his own control that he's not thinking about the fallout. If this project goes south, your name will be dragged through the mud right alongside his. Marcus's smear campaign will look like a gentle breeze compared to what the financial press will do to you." The mention of Marcus sent a fresh, icy spike of fury through Alara's chest. She had spent 2 years scrubbing his name from her reputation. She would not let Kaelin Thorne's arrogant, blind stubbornness become the catalyst for her second professional ruin. She looked at Julian, really looked at him. Beneath the panic, he was a decent man who genuinely cared about the building. He was also terrified of his boss. "If I walk away completely," Alara said slowly, her mind racing, calculating angles and leverage, "I lose all control over my intellectual property. My name stays on the blueprints, but my voice is removed from the room." "Yes," Julian breathed, hope flickering in his eyes. Alara took a deep breath, the rain cooling the lingering, inexplicable heat at her collarbone. She made a decision. It tasted like ash, but it was the only strategic move available. "I'm not accepting the $5,000 a month data entry role, Julian," she said, her voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "That is an insult, and I do not accept insults." Of course, I told him it was insulting." However, Alara interrupted, raising a finger. "I am willing to accept a revised, independent consulting contract. I will not report to Sterling and Croft. I will report directly to the board's oversight committee. My scope of work will be strictly limited to reviewing and approving all geothermal and seismic integration plans. I will have final sign-off authority on any modifications to the central core." Julian's eyes widened. Final sign-off? Cale will never agree to that. He micromanages every detail. Then he can explain to the board why he's risking a $200 million liability by hiring an incompetent firm and alienating the only architect who understands the building's biology. Alara countered smoothly. "You will draft the contract with those terms. You will present it to the board, emphasizing that it is a necessary risk mitigation strategy to protect their investment. And then you will put it on Cale's desk and tell him the board insists upon it." Julian stared at her, a mixture of awe and terror dawning on his face. "You're going to force him to sign it." "I'm going to give him a choice," Alara corrected. "He can either swallow his pride and let me protect his building from the shadows, or he can explain to his investors why he fired the lead architect over a personality clash right before a major structural overhaul. Billionaires hate bad press, Julian. He'll sign it." Julian swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "I'll draft it. I'll have it to you by the end of the day." "Make it by noon," Alara said. She turned and opened the door of the waiting town car. "And Julian? Don't tell him I suggested this. Let him think it was the board's idea. I want him to wonder how I outmaneuvered him." She slid into the back seat, the leather cool against her skin. As the car pulled away from the curb, she watched Julian standing in the rain, a small, triumphant smile finally breaking through her professional mask. She hadn't won the war, but she had secured a foothold behind enemy lines. An hour later, Alara was sitting in a booth at The Grind, a cramped, fiercely independent coffee shop in Capitol Hill that smelled of roasted beans, damp wool, and old books. It was her sanctuary, the place she had retreated to during the darkest months of her blacklisting. Across the table sat Chloe Lynn, Alara's best friend, former college roommate, and currently a fiercely protective corporate lawyer who looked ready to commit corporate espionage on Alara's behalf. Chloe's glaring at her phone screen, her dark eyes flashing with murderous intent. "Let me get this straight," Chloe said, her voice dangerously low. "This overgrown, brooding, vampire CEO-looking motherfucker publicly humiliated you, offered you $5,000 a month to do data entry, and you just walked out?" "I did more than walk out, Chloe. I negotiated a back door," Alara said, taking a slow sip of her black espresso. The bitter taste was grounding. "Julian is drafting a new contract. Independent consultant. Direct line to the board. Final sign-off on the geothermal core." Chloe blinked, her furious expression morphing into one of grudging respect. "You sneaky, brilliant bitch." "I had to," Alara said, her voice softening as she looked down at her tablet. "If I walked away, he would have let Sterling and Croft butcher my designs, and when it failed, my name would be on the wreckage. I couldn't let him do that to me again." Chloe reached across the table, covering Alara's hand with her own. Her touch was warm, a stark contrast to the icy tension that had gripped Alara all morning. "Hey, look at me!" Alara met her friend's gaze. "You are not that naive kid who got screwed over by Marcus," Chloe said firmly. "You are Alara Vance. You are the sharpest architect in this city, and you just played a billionaire dragon king at his own game. Don't let him make you feel small. He's the one who's terrified." Alara frowned. Terrified? He looked like he was carved out of glacier ice. He didn't care at all. "Please," Chloe scoffed, leaning back and crossing her arms. "I've deposed guys like this. The ones who are truly indifferent don't make a scene. They just quietly route the termination through HR. This guy? He called an emergency board meeting, dragged you into a room, and personally delivered the insult. That's not indifference, Elle. That's overcompensation. He's trying way too hard to convince himself that he doesn't want you there. Ilara's breath caught. The phantom heat at her collarbone flared again, a sudden sharp pulse that made her press her fingers against the silk of her blouse. He's trying way too hard. Was that it? Was his cruelty a mask? She thought back to the sub-basement. The way his hand had closed around her wrist, hot and desperate. The way his eyes had blown wide, dark and primal, before he violently recoiled as if burned. The way he had fled the room, his posture rigid as if holding himself together by sheer force of will. No, Ilara told herself firmly, pushing the thought away. Don't romanticize his abuse. He's a billionaire narcissist who doesn't like being challenged. That's all. Regardless of his motives, Ilara said, her voice regaining its crisp, professional edge. It doesn't matter, I have my foot in the door. I'm going to review every single schematic Sterling and Croft produces. I'm going to find every flaw, every shortcut, every corner they try to cut, and I'm going to flag it to the board. I'm going to make his life a living, bureaucratic hell from afar. Chloe grinned, a wicked, predatory expression that mirrored Ilara's own. Now that is the Ilara I know. Do you need me to review the contract Julian sends over? I'll make sure there are no non-compete traps or intellectual property waivers hidden in the fine print. Please, Ilara said, feeling a genuine wave of gratitude. I'll forward it the second it hits my inbox. They spent the next hour debriefing, the tension in Ilara's shoulders slowly melting away under the steady, unwavering support of her best friend. They talked about everything except Kaylin Thorne. They talked about Chloe's upcoming trial, about the terrible new indie band playing at the venue down the street, about the fact that Ilara desperately needed to buy new, less rain-soaked work boots. It was normal. It was safe. It was exactly what Ilara needed to rebuild her armor. At 11:45 a.m., Ilara's phone buzzed on the table. She looked down, an email notification from Julian Croft. Subject: Revised Consulting Agreement, Obsidian Tower. Ilara's heart gave a single hard thump. She tapped the screen, opening the attachment. She scanned the document rapidly, her trained eyes darting over the legal jargon, searching for the traps. Independent contractor status. Check. Direct reporting to the Board Oversight Committee. Check. Exclusive jurisdiction over geothermal and seismic integration reviews. Check. Premium hourly rate, triple her original asking price. Check. It was flawless. Julian had not only delivered, he had weaponized the contract in her favor. At the very bottom of the document, there was a digital signature block. 2 signatures were already there, Julian Croft and Mr. Arthur Pendleton, chairman of the board. And below them, stark, sharp, and undeniable, was a third signature. Kaylin Thorne. Ilara stared at the name, the elegant, aggressive sweep of the ink. He had signed it. He had swallowed his pride, or perhaps the board had forced his hand, but the result was the same. She was back in the game. A slow, genuine smile spread across Ilara's face. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of a chess player who had just watched her opponent fall perfectly into a trap they didn't even know was set.
Well?
Chloe asked, leaning over the table, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. Did the dragon sign? Ilara locked her phone screen and slipped it into her pocket. She picked up her espresso, raising the cup in a silent, mock toast. He signed, Ilara said, her voice a low, satisfied purr. Let the games begin. She took a sip of the bitter coffee, the warmth spreading through her chest, chasing away the last lingering chill of the boardroom. She didn't know what Kaylin Thorne's endgame was, and she didn't care. She was Ilara Vance, she had survived the wilderness, and she was about to show the king of the castle exactly what happened when you underestimated the architect.